particular course. It was uniquely funded and is unique to the kind of work that I usually do. I am a folklorist for the state of Oregon. I work for the Oregon Folklife Network, which is the state's folk and traditional arts program. Hey, come on in. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So I was just explaining that the Oregon Folklife Network is a kind of odd partner. We happen to be housed at the University of Oregon, and so we do serve student interests here, and we partner frequently with the Folklore and Public Cultures program as it's taught on campus. So it was through that connection that I happened to be in the opportunity to be able to co-teach this course, Craft, Clothing, and Culture, with instructor Ricky Saltzman, and this course was funded through a World Learning Initiative. And so it came with federal dollars that also then created a structure that wouldn't necessarily be the case for everyone who's tuning in right now, but I think that the infrastructure, while it was somewhat laborious, was very helpful. So I wanted to share that with you as well. So in this program, we were matched with another country who also wanted to do this kind of international exchange. So the world learning model it's kind of like a internet dating model where everyone who wants to be in an exchange program needed to first apply with a letter of inquiry stating who you are, what you're interested in, why you would want to do some kind of international exchange, what your outcomes you were hoping for. Very structured modules for uploading into the letter of inquiry process. If chosen, then there were, let's say, I can't recall exactly, but let's pretend there are 30 other organizations around the globe who are interested in doing an exchange program. So then we're all reviewing each other's materials and seeing who we might be a likely connection with. And in that process, then ranking your top 5 picks, and then we would get to have a phone conversation with those 5 potential matches. And that also had its series of what are your questions for them, what are you hoping to get out of those conversations, and then in the process we ended up choosing this museum in Romania, and they chose us, and we ranked them as our first pick, and we were ultimately matched with them. So the way that kind of rolled out toward this course is that we spent a couple of years going through the matchmaking process, and then that was going to fund a 2-term course. So winter of 2020 was to be a virtual, synchronous and asynchronous kind of engagement period for students, staff, and artists in Romania, as well as students, staff, and artists in Oregon. And that the second term was intended to continue to engage those same cohorts. Let's say there were about 10 people in each country, and then to actually travel 5 to the corresponding country. So that was the plan, is to have a virtual and in-person exchange for the second term. But of course, that was the pre-COVID plan. And then it was just at the tail end of spring term when we finished our virtual engagement. We had plans to receive Romania, and we were working on our plan for going there when the globe shut down and none of us were traveling. So that, in actuality, what we ended up producing was a 2-term virtual-only exchange. So I want to just go back for a moment and describe a little bit about some of the bureaucratic process that matched us with Romania and then helped us to actually be able to produce the programming. I think that though it was arduous, I think all of the templates and modules and required articulation of outcomes and goals did help us actually be successful. So I would say that if you have a third party that you can scapegoat in that process, and you can be angry because the university requires this or the NEH requires this, then go ahead and embrace that, because I think as a form of bonding, you can say, yeah, this is really difficult work. It's not fun. We'd rather just get on the phone and chat and feel out what we want to do. Having to actually go through the structured modules did get us to clarity about what we wanted to do with each other. And so in this case, you'll see that the project components were pre-populated. Those were questions that we needed to fill in. In this case, this was Romania's version of this. So that was their ideas about who they would target to impact during this exchange, and what kind of cultural themes they wanted to explore and how they might recruit their participants. And then we were part of their shortlist. So we were a shortlist organization, and we had these kinds of ideas of things that we might want to help to share. What were the potential programming that we felt prepared to be able to produce, and where we each were trying to articulate, well, what is the overlap here? So though these were felt somewhat constructed, I think I'd be very happy to share any of these templates with others, because I do think that they were helpful. In the end, what we chose to exchange with our colleagues in Romania was what I call folk and traditional arts, but what is more globally considered to be intangible cultural heritage exchange. And so we were looking at indigenous arts that are coming out of Oregon, that emerge out of Oregon landscapes, that are part of people and practice today. And then Romanians were wanting to share some of the place-based traditions that are unique to their people and their culture and their landscape. And so students were going to interview artists. They were going to learn a little bit more about what makes culture happen, and identify for themselves personally what that looks like. So we were talking theoretically about what is culture, how is it practiced. We were going to interview people who were doing it at a really high level of fine artistry, but we were also going to bring that home and think about what do these things look like in my own practice. So I also shared another, just a screenshot of another part of what was required in this matchmaking effort, and in articulating what we were going to do together. We had to come up with 4 objectives, and 2 of them here that I shared, one of them being participants can articulate a set of intergenerational barriers to passing on intangible cultural heritage, that they can identify clear solutions for overcoming them. So that was one of the things that both entities were really interested in, is a lot of times these cultural traditions are solidified within the practices of elders and less so practiced by younger generations. And why is that? And when is it that people start to get more involved in something that their aunties have shown them and that they've done? But in all of the pressures to participate in modern life, how do you choose this, and what are the barriers to choosing these kinds of traditional practices? So we wanted to help participants to be able to come up with some solutions for themselves. And then the second one was about being able to communicate the value of place-based and tangible cultural heritage, being able to use that language really comfortably, and then articulate them in online spaces, because we all kind of agreed that there is that youth have the opportunity, they have time and sometimes interest, but why don't we see these kinds of practices in these internet spaces where youth are hanging out? So that's just a couple of the a couple of the objectives that we were going for. And again, I'm happy to share these templates with anyone if you want to email me later. So I'm going to move us through the timeline toward when we produced the first course. So course 1, winter term, Folklore 410, 510, we were still coming up with some plans. Like, ultimately, this was going to travel people back and forth. So how were we going to decide who travels? And what were we going to do when we were there or when Romanians were here? What would help them to experience the traditions of Oregon, indigenous traditions specifically? So who would we partner with, and doing some of that outreach and laying the groundwork. And then in fall, we were heavily recruiting students to be able to participate in this program, which was complex and hard to explain in a short blurb and in a eye-catching poster, like, okay, there's the opportunity to travel, but not everybody gets to travel. So we're going to talk about this stuff that happens in Oregon, but we're also going to be interacting with Romanians, and seemed really cool, but how are we going to articulate that? How are we going to get people interested? So we were doing some recruiting over fall, and then winter we started to launch this course. One of the requirements, because this is set up to be a virtual exchange by the World Learning Institute, that this is pre-COVID, remember, so we were just trying to figure out, how do you engage people virtually and asynchronously or synchronously? So these were new concepts to us, so to a lot of us around the globe. But what we decided to go for as a key way to engage people who were in different time zones and had different different cultures that they were trying to share about and connect this material to, is that we created a private Facebook group. And so everyone in these courses in Oregon and in Romania were required, and I'm seeing that here, my audience here is not seeing the slide, but the Zoom people are seeing the slide. So I'm trying to figure out how I might share it both places. Oh, now you see it.
Yeah, we can see it here, and I think they can see it on Zoom.
Oh, excellent. Okay. It's just not what I'm seeing.
So we can see this on Zoom.
What I'm seeing on this screen is what you're seeing.
Which one?
So when I click, you're here.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So oddly though, I cannot manipulate that screen that you're seeing. I'll try one more place. I'll just go ahead and go with what you're seeing and not manipulate it here. But so an example of an assignment we might have given is, again, we're trying to connect how is tradition practiced, how is that practiced in the fine arts sense, but then how is it practiced in the everyday sense? And so one of the assignments was we're talking about the concept of a shrine, and shrines can be made in a sacred space, they can be made in a community space, and they also can be made in a personal space. And so we asked students to take a picture of a personal shrine and then explain what we're seeing. And then they were required to engage with each other in this format as well. And we found that to be a bit of a challenge, and that instructors needed to model that engagement. Otherwise, like other kinds of Facebook interaction, you might just choose to do it or not choose to do it, or you might just like it and move on. But to really come up with ways to inspire further conversation. So we would model things like, tell us about this thing that I see, or who's in these photographs, or how did you choose these photographs? So just ways to keep the conversation going and to spread it out across the group too. So does anybody else have photographs in their personal shrines, or what is this similar to that you've experienced?
Is this both groups sharing, or is this?
Yes, so both groups, Romanians and Oregonians, were required to become members of this private. Come on in. Did you just find us?
Yeah.
Yeah, come on in.
They're using English, that's their.
Yes, so that was another part of what what we needed to figure out in doing this exchange. And our contact, the staff person who was creating the project through the museum in Gorj County, Romania, did indicate that she would help it to be English speaking for this particular context. You'll see later on, hopefully I can get the right screens to pop up, that some of the interviews were happening. We would pose questions in English, they would respond in Romanian. So, and then there would be some translation. But that was one of the ways that we chose to do the asynchronous engagement. The synchronous engagement, we did monthly Zoom meetups. So in order to be in this class, you had to agree to be able to, at 8 a.m., be in the library to have a, what's very familiar to us now, but pre-COVID was like, ooh, we're gonna use technology to see people on the other side of the globe and talk to them about our culture and about our class and what we're doing. It was 8 a.m. for us, it was about 7 p.m. for them, so they're at the end of their day. We definitely saw as the hour went on, people like, I'm ready to go home. But that was the time that we could figure we would all be reasonably awake and could interact with one another. And so once a month we had these synchronous conversations. We got to meet the couple of artists, Romanian artists, and learn more about what they do. We got to introduce the two Indigenous elders who were sharing their storytelling and beading work, and then introduce the students to each other so that they could get just more comfortable in dialogue and learn more about one another. So then so that last picture, I'll just stay there for a second. This was the last time we all got together. So this, I put the date March 5th of 2020 was that the last time we did this synchronous time together. And I even remember hugging Roberta, and she kind of backed up and she was like, I think we're not supposed to do that right now. It's like, oh, yeah, because we're hearing about what, my news was this is happening far away, but her news was this is right here. And so we were learning how to be safe with each other. And this is the last time we all kind of got together. They stayed that time to talk to the class and teach us more about their culture and let us practice some interviewing skills and techniques. Then, so then the goal was we were going to, in the second term, we had kind of a competitive proposal writing for how to choose who would travel with us to Romania. And so we had selected our travelers and we were getting our vaccines and things ready to travel. And then we learned that no, in fact, this second term was all going to also be virtual. So, so now we were figuring out, well, how do we travel them to Oregon? Because we were still wanted to produce a sense of place for them. And we had made these connections with museums and culture workers around the various tribes. And so we wanted to still commit to that. So we ended up doing these virtual tours and we did recorded interviews. And I can share a little bit more about where that ended up. But ultimately, the deliverables that we had to shift into this new format was we were going to document what we did on a website, and also one of the students proposed a zine. And again, these deliverables were ones that the students proposed. So at the end of spring term, their kind of final project for the winter term, the first term course was, okay, now we've explored these concepts. What's a product that we could create out of this rich experience so that it's not just ours to hold on to and enjoy, but we can share it with other people. So students gave PowerPoint presentations as their last thing, and from that, students voted on what they thought would be the best way to encapsulate what we'd done. And we kind of kept going back and forth between the website and the zine. So we did a website where we housed the zine. So I'm going to share that website with you. And also, I should say that while the site itself was intended to be collaborative and engage all the students in that work, it probably ended up more heavily landing on 1 or 2 graduate students. So this is a 400, 500 level class. The graduate students had, I think, some more skills to offer to it and some more investment in it looking a certain way. So they took a leadership role in creating the zine and the website, and the other students were more curating aspects of it. So we did our virtual tour. Let me see if I can. The Alive as Folk. Might just take it a second, or
It's up just a second ago, Emily.
it was?
Popped on the screen for a second, yeah.
Well, I wonder if I need to. Oh, that's my slide. That's the internet, but I want it to be that. That is so interesting.
Do you want to stop share and try to re-share again or something, or?
Sure, I think it would be valuable to do that. Pardon me, everyone, talk amongst yourselves while I get back to my. Okay, so what they ended up creating is, and I'll just make this as big as possible for you. They created the Alive as Folk website, and I thought they really did a great job articulating from the very beginning. So welcome in English, welcome in Romanian, welcome in a Calpuian language, welcome to Alive as Folk Transmission in a Digital Age project blog. Over a 6-month period from January to June 2020, students from University of Oregon partnered with students in Romania to embark on a journey sharing intangible cultural heritage through an intergenerational approach while exploring the transmission of Native American and Romanian intangible cultural heritage, such as regalia making, storytelling, traditional folk costumes, rug weaving, and wood carvings. So, and then they are crediting the project as it was funded, and they created a graphic, which is the cover of the zine that they created as well. And so let me just check my notes on where I wanted to take you on this journey through the Alive as Folk site. So first, the artist spotlight. I'll just take us to a couple of places, if you don't mind, before. That's so interesting. It doesn't want to go to that other internet space. Sorry. Alive as Folk. Yeah. Let me just go there myself. Okay, I'm back. And so we had 2 Romanian artists, 2 Oregonian artists, and so the students learned interviewing techniques and shared some of those. And then one of the products that the Romanian colleagues created were these really beautiful videos. And here's an example of our UO students interviewing this artist. And since we didn't have, we weren't physically able to interview them, we could still pose some questions to them. And I think if I start around 2 minutes, you'll be able to hear one of the students ask a question. And I might have to. It's coming through Zoom.
We can hear something, yeah.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Oregon. I had a couple of questions for the traditional artists. One of them being, do you have a most prized possession? What is it and why? And the second question is, who is the most important mentor in your life and why?
Cel mai important lucru din viața mea este ghergheful. Nu am numai unul, am mai multe, la care de fiecare dată când vreau să găsesc liniște, acolo mă așez și lucrez. Lucrez de la 12 ani și pentru mine este foarte important acest lucru. Cel mai important mentor al meu a fost și încă este mama mea. Totdeauna ea m-a învățat să lucrez, am învățat covoare și de la mama și de la o vecină. În tot timpul m-a ajutat, mi-a tors, mi-a vopsit lână, a vopsit alături de mine, m-a învățat să vopsesc, m-a învățat să lucrez. În tot timpul a fost persoana care a fost în spatele meu.
A folklore and public culture graduate student at the University of Oregon, and this is my question for the artist. At what age did you learn your tradition, and what has learning this tradition taught you about your heritage?
Pause it for a second, but for some reason the folks on Zoom aren't seeing this. And it says on top your screen sharing is paused.
Resume share.
Yeah, try that, yeah. I'm not seeing it here, so.
Yeah. Well, let me see. Seems like. If you would like, I can also just direct people to this and kind of, I know we're at about the point where we might get some more conversation going, and I'm happy to just end at that. Yeah, it looks like it's having a hard time reconnecting with the sharing.
Okay.
So if you want, we can change format now, and you can know that there's the website, and I can send that link around, and then attached to that site is also the zine, which is another way that we engage students in thinking through what we learned, and then kind of capturing that in their own little, almost like a scrapbook kind of format. So do you want to curate from the chat, or do you want me to just kind of go through the chat and see?
At this point, since there's not a lot of folks on Zoom, I wonder if people on Zoom have questions, if they could unmute and maybe we can hear them in the room. We can try that and see.
Okay.
if anyone on Zoom has a question.
And maybe I'll just change this to the speaker view so that whoever is talking, we can still engage with people here. I don't know.
Dorothy?
Hi, Dorothy. I can pop open the chat too and just kind of read along. So we just had some conversation about what's working technologically.
Sounds like they heard the sound, even though they weren't seeing the video, so that's okay.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
well, that's something.
Great. Anyone have questions, or anyone here have questions, or? Emily, do you want to switch it back to you, as the window on you, and then,
Sure. View.
or gallery is fine, yeah, that's great.
All of us.
So like you talked about what was for you, what was the most challenging part of this project, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that even pre-COVID, we recognized that keeping the students engaged in this kind of asynchronous format was challenging. Like they could go to this Facebook site. We figured it was a captive audience because we knew many of them were going there anyway and posting about themselves in their social media habits. So we figured it was an easy access point. But I still think that engaging in course material on that platform did not seem intuitive. It wasn't the same kind of thing. So it didn't just map right on in the way that we thought people would just start chatting about this rather than chatting about what they did that afternoon. So I think that was definitely a challenge, was to figure out how to model that engagement and inspire that engagement, and then to kind of even grade that engagement. How do you what are different people's style for being chatty on Facebook? So we can come up with some rubric around how often they were engaging and maybe how many questions they were posing and how rich those questions were. But I think we were a little blindsided by not expecting that it wouldn't just happen. So to be honest, that was a challenge. And then, of course, having COVID shut us down in the midst of it was a huge challenge, because if we can remember back, most of us thought that this was just going to be a week or two, that we were not back in our regular routines. And so we kept kind of thinking, well, we'll do this for a while, maybe we'll still get to travel. And so trying to create a contingency plan without knowing for how long we were really in that contingency condition was challenging. But I know that's not especially helpful in this environment, for this workshop, because hopefully we won't be in that situation again, where in the middle of a program you're having to come up with a whole new way to work around a pandemic. But I'd say that engagement, and then the Romanian colleagues, they created a program that was targeted at high school students, and I believe it was through like an extracurricular program, and so they did not have as much incentive to engage as our students who were getting graded and were registered for a course. And so trying to get conversation happening, even when we had these synchronous Zoom meetups, it tended to be a lot of polite listening, and the grown-ups were doing all of the talking. And so we're trying to find ways to call people into the conversation, also recognizing the different cultural contexts for that. Like, was it our job to pull them into conversation, or was it their teacher's job to pull them into conversation? How much were they really understanding about what we were saying in English? Many of them could speak English, but of course, comprehension and speaking and
Was that one of their goals, is to increase their language? A main priority, or?
On their side of
Yeah.
things, to increase English language?
Yeah.
It wasn't part of what we articulated in the outcomes.
Right,
So
yeah.
I'm not 100% sure how they recruited for students into that program. There were a couple who were super engaged, but then of course you always want to have everybody engaged to some degree, and figuring out what are the other ways to engage people with such limited channels was tricky.
And you guys did develop a rubric then, Emily, or engagement, or?
I don't know. I don't remember that. Of course, I wasn't the instructor of record. I was the co-instructor helper from a different position. So I'm not sure if Ricky was creating some other thing through Canvas that helped to articulate what that rubric was.
Dorothee's got a question. Dorothee, you want to try unmuting and see if we can hear you?
Yeah, Emily, thank you so much. I think it's a fascinating project, and I can't imagine how many hurdles you had to go through to make it work.
Well, thanks for being here, Dorothee.
So I was wondering, are there lasting effects? Are you still in relationship? Can you report about, the benefits, long-term benefits for teams on all sides? And I think I need to ask quickly, because it seems I didn't get that. Was this a university, a Romanian university, or did you say a museum with whom you collaborated?
Okay, yeah, so long-term, and then who exactly was our collaborator in Romania? It was a museum. And so they were partnering with a teacher to recruit high school students into the program. So, and they had done an exchange in West Virginia, that same museum, like maybe 5 or 10 years earlier. So they had some experience with this, and I think we're trying to replicate a model that had worked for them previously. But I can't underestimate how much the global panic around the pandemic changed people's engagement with the course. I mean, that became a topic of our conversations, is how are you doing? In fact, we ended up talking a lot in some of our posts were about the innovative ways that people were applying tradition to masks, and what were new traditions that people were creating around masks, and how do you communicate a sense of solidarity during a time when people are far apart. So we incorporated what we were all going through to a large degree, but specific to your question about who our colleagues were in Romania, that was their infrastructure. And then the long-term engagement, that was a huge part of what World Learning wanted to see. So we had to have a plan for what was going to happen coming out of this project, and how would we keep things going. So we naively thought that people would continue to stay engaged through our Facebook format, because here we all built this relationship with each other and we could keep the conversation going. And I think, once again, the staff people continued to litter the conversation with more, this is what's going on, and this is what's happening in the US right now. How are things in Romania, and some back and forth there. The World Learning also had some clear benefits for students who go through the program themselves. You become part of an alumni cohort, and there are certain benefits that come along with being an alumni, access to things and credentials that you can put on your CV. And those were articulated to us in a format that I can share here, if that would be an interesting model for people to see, like, okay, what might we create as a way to incentivize ongoing benefits of participating in this kind of course. So I think and we figured that the website would also be a place that information could live on. Of course, any website also suffers from becoming less relevant, or if the things that you're connecting to change, then your links are not linking out. So we do have it connected with OFN's site, and then OFN's site is also connected to the Museum of Natural and Cultural History, so we can claim that there is a bit of traffic that is going to always come into these sites, because these are ongoing programmings. more so than I think possibly just embedding it within your course that could just stand out there and languish if you don't have an ongoing partnership. But those are some things I can think of off the top of my head, and if any, maybe at the end of, when we're done here, I should forward to you some of these PDFs that, the templates we went through and the zine and just some examples. Okay, great, hi Robert.
Go ahead.
Do you have a question?
No, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Melissa Palma. I'm the academic programs manager for the School of Global Studies and Languages.
Great.
And this is really interesting to me for so many reasons. And one is personal. And the other ones, I won't talk to you about that right now, I might later.
Yeah.
But COVID was an interesting time for people who were creative. I mean, I can hear you say, and remember so clearly the like just checking in, like how are you, and the worry as everything was developing. But then upon retrospect, like if you are creative, and if you are an artist or a storyteller, you might look back on that time. Like I know personally, I took up weaving during COVID, and I also created a zine of poetry during COVID, because it was like a time to kind of go inwards and there's not a lot you could do. So if that was your means of, expressing yourself, then it became like kind of almost a rich opportunity for some. So I'm curious, like, if there was an opportunity to look back and, ask anyone, like, to look back and reflect on, like, did the art, reflect what you were going through? Like, did that end up being a rich time to create things, and how did it change based off of COVID? Because, it did become a really interesting time for a lot of people, but only when you look back. I mean, at the time we were all just in survival mode.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the assignments that we had was an alternative self-portrait. And so people shared, I know one student took a picture of some crochet work that she had been doing during the class and why that was meaningful to her, who she was making it for. And another student took a picture of a necklace from that has a pendant that's a coin from the country of origin for her. But then there was one of the Romanian participants did a literal self-portrait of she painted herself in a mask. And so that was a representative of that time and how she was seeing herself. So we did have opportunity to check in and see how some of that was evolving. I love your idea to go back and reinitiate conversations that would help us reflect on what we did and grow some of these concepts. I think one of the biggest barriers to doing that would be that this 2-term course for us was grant funded. And so there wasn't any funding, there isn't any, as much as there is the desire to have an ongoing project or product, without ongoing funding to support that, there is little incentive to keep that going. And so, I would kind of offer that forth to funders as well, that if you want an ongoing thing, then the staff time that it takes to maintain or to have those conversations, the Folklife Network, who was the grantee in this situation, is almost entirely grant funded. So if I don't have a grant to report my hours to, I can't really do it. It might be that for staff, there might be a way to come up with, or for other faculty, it might be a way to have a fellowship or some other course buyout that would allow you to invest again.
Yeah, I can see, I hear that. That's absolutely real. And I can see like it is such a, like with just the tiniest little space, and with more time that goes by, that's gonna be like an important historical artifact for for communities, for cities, countries, the world.
Yeah.
To reflect back on like what was happening during that time. So I could kind of see that being like in storytelling. Everyone's got, that's like a worldwide unifying event.
Your
that,
personal narrative.
Yeah. and how it affected, I don't know, it's really interesting. It's too bad that it happened during COVID, and it's also kind of really interesting and unique that it happened during COVID.
Yeah, yeah. There could be a grant written right there that says, here's the project, we're gonna bring these people back together, and this is what we're gonna do. Yeah. Did I answer all your questions? I feel like there were a few in there. Okay, great. Yeah, Robert.
So I've got one shorter, I think. and
Okay.
one longer. The
Yeah.
shorter one is, what was World Learning's role in this?
World Learning was the funder, and it was through the Department of Ed, or Department of State. So it was kind of, we talked about it as being like soft diplomacy funding.
Yeah.
Communities Connecting Heritage was I think the program under the World Learning umbrella. And apparently this was the last time they were doing this sort of thing. So we were also finishing a project that had to happen in a very new format all of a sudden with under the direction and coordination of a World Learning program that was also sunsetting. So I think there was a little bit of frayed edges at the end of things because it just was more of a fizzle than a yay, this happened. And though I think that internally the community of people, we were really bonded to each other because of this thing we were going through together. And one of the things that I hadn't mentioned about in our tour that we were going to give the Romanians, we had it scheduled out. And so what we ended up doing was asking each student to take a day, and they posted on that day. Today is the day we would have picked you up at your hotel. You would have gotten in last night and got into a hotel. We would have taken you to Voodoo Donuts and shown you this, and we would have taken you to the Oregon Historical Society and shown you this, and just a lot of links to give them deeper access into what we would have shared with them. So that was a way that each student took some ownership over this tour. And then they got to, we also curated a care package because we figured had they been here, they would have received some things, they would have bought some things. And since we had some money that we would have spent on travel, we figured we would just buy 10 of this and 10 of that, and artists made things that they would have shared and gifted, and we sent care packages. And we took the photos of us like, this is me, what is this thing that we just got from Romania?
My second question is more like about the ownership, and maybe it's more the way I'm really thinking, it's like selection of what you're going to cover. So I'm thinking that the Romanian students probably feel a strong ownership over the cultural aspects that are being shared.
Mm-hmm.
Do the Oregon kids feel the same thing since it's
Right.
It's native culture?
Right, exactly, and not native
Not
students.
their culture.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering, like, if in retrospect, would you, like, how do you get them? Did they take ownership over that? Did they? How do you handle that? Yeah.
I think that we were thinking of the course as the kind of training of tools and skills that culture workers need, more so than cultural practitioners. And so even as we were teaching students how to document, how to interview, how to take photographs, how to ask questions to get that rich context, and we talked a lot about cultural appropriation and what that looks like in Indigenous communities and what it looks like in Romanian communities, these highly decorated sleeves and things that show up as Christian Dior, thousands of dollars garments that are taking designs from Indigenous people of Romania. So, but I think that your point is really solid about there's a disconnect between the students because they don't necessarily, like, the biggest thing they had in common was we're in Oregon today.
Right, well, when you're talking about the care package, they're gonna do Voodoo Donuts and they're gonna do, and it's not really criticism because I think there's value to it, but it's just more about, like, maybe if you were designing it again, would you do the same thing, or would you choose different, like, how would, like, if someone's making a course like this, are there any suggestions you have about what kinds of topics people choose?
Yeah, good points. One thing is I should clarify that although on day one when we picked them up and took them to Voodoo Donuts, that was the agenda, or at least part of that agenda. We also had a tour to the museum at Warm Springs and the Chachalu, and so these were all anchored around visits to tribal museums in most cases, and to artists to connect with what we had been learning about. That doesn't change the fact that the cultures we were learning about were not connected to the students in the program. And I definitely think it would be a richer program if we could have targeted Native students for that opportunity. I think that we were looking for, there's so many traditional artists in Oregon today. And so when we were thinking about what could we share with Romanians about Oregon culture, there's all of this, but what really makes most sense is First People, because these are the people who have truly Oregon today culture. And so we started with that, and then probably should have gone all the way through and said, let's work with Neely, let's work with the NASA ARC and get Native students into this conversation.
I'm wondering, like, part of this could be that the Oregon students gain something about learning about their historical culture.
Yes, and learning about colonization and decolonization was definitely an element of this, and that I think was somewhat successful, but also teaching about decolonization, I think you have to hit a person at the time when they can receive that, but otherwise it becomes a little bit too academic, I think. But we definitely covered that and hoped to get people, and I think that we saw evidence that there was some aha moments for non-Native students, but I think I also saw evidence that there were people who just like, shouldn't we all just share culture? And isn't it just better if we all share? And so we tried to drill down into some complexities there, but yeah, thanks for your thoughts.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple questions in the chat that turned up on yours, but not on my chat.
Oh,
I don't know, maybe you can open the chat and see if there's something.
Okay, I'm wondering about the political status of the World Learning Institution. That's Dorothee's question. And so they were in the Department of State, but I don't know how World Learning is working today. The Communities Connecting Heritage program does not exist anymore, but the World Learning umbrella, I believe, is still active. I saw
They're
their
nonprofit, yeah.
Is that?
DC, yeah.
Oh, okay. They're a nonprofit in DC, is what Robert Elliott is saying. So I don't have as much information about that. I apologize. Let me just check this other question, also from Dorothee. Were there prerequisites to taking the course? Did they have to have taken, for example, Ricky's field studies beforehand, or was this considered to be a field studies course? And it was not considered a field studies course. It was a 400, 500 level, 410, 510. So I think that was considered kind of an experimental course. And I believe it fulfilled some prerequisites, like it filled, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking as a non-faculty person, but I think there are some like core basic
education.
Yeah, some core educational requirements that it fulfilled, but it did not require any pre-field work or anthro or folklore classes or Native studies classes in order to get into the course. We were just looking we broadcast it as widely as we could and hope to get people in to the seats. I think there were 8 students for the winter term and 6 students for the spring term. So I think we lost 1 or 2 in the COVID shift. And I think once students knew that if they weren't chosen to do the travel, it was a little less of a carrot to dangle to stay in for a second term and learn more of the same thing. And I know you've got to learn a lot. You have a lot of requirements to meet as a student. So being able to take another thing that's named 410, 510 folklore might not be. So that would possibly be, if you were doing a 2-term course. I know that Gabriela Martinez and Lynn Steven do another 2-term course, so they might be folks to talk with about how that model works or what the drawbacks are.
And they'll be doing a workshop for us in a couple weeks.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah, so there's a plug.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Emily? Emily, if not, thank you so much for presenting for us. And I will, I'll be in touch and I can get the links and stuff from you so I can then have them available to folks who are interested. So
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for coming. Good to see you.
thank you.
Yeah.